Morena, and welcome to the Alicia McKay Show on today, Friday, the 23rd of September, where I am currently in the midst of my third COVID infection. So just let that sit with you for a minute. Quite frankly, I have had enough of this shit. This is the second time in 8 weeks that I've had COVID. And so really could have done without that this week. I'm supposed to be on tour. I missed a bunch of really exciting events at bookshops and bars in Auckland and Wellington. And so for those of you who were signed up for any of my events and I did not turn up, I'm very sorry for this. But also, my co-speaker, Shane Hatton, has been out there absolutely rocking Aotearoa. It's been his first visit, and I sent an email to everybody who was supposed to be at the evening events and said, look, I need you to bring it. I need you to show Shane how we do it here in Aotearoa, because it is his first time on the motu, and all things considered, I believe that you have, and also that Shane has learned not to run an open bar tab at a New Zealand event again. So, look, I am in the middle of my third COVID. I'm on the turn now. It's been a bit of a dicey week. Haven't had a lot of fun this week, but I am definitely on the up now. So thank goodness for that. So I want to open with 2 books that I have read in my COVID isolation, because it will come as no surprise to you that some of my time while I've been sick has been reading. And the first book that I finished this week is one that I finally finished, actually. So interestingly, I'm a real book chewer. Like I pick up a book and then I power through it. I'm a very quick reader. But I have been reading A Little Life for probably 2 or 3 months now, off and on, and not quite finishing it and feeling really guilty about it. And so COVID provided the opportunity for me to get stuck in and finish this novel, which is, I believe, the second novel from Hanya Yanagihara, and it is just such a magnificent read, but it is really dense and it is really hard going. If you are looking for a bit of an opus to get stuck into, and I believe this is about 200,000 words, then I do strongly recommend this book. It is a beautiful, beautiful, compelling novel. It's set in New York City. It follows the lives of a friendship group of 4 different men and their experiences, but it's centered around a protagonist who has had this horrific childhood and is coping with that in various ways as an adult. And it is very clever and very dark, but it is a really excellent read. So A Little Life, I've now got permission to read or to start the other Hanya Yanagihara books. And it's worth noting about the author, because one of my favorite things to do when I finish a book is to then learn whatever I can about the author, if it's a new author. And Hanya is a full-time editor for the style section of the New York Times. She's a full-time job, a very busy job. She works in journalism, and she writes books at night in her spare time. Right? So she's written 3. She's shortlisted for Man Booker Prize. Like, she's writing good stuff, and she's just doing it at night when she goes home. So if that doesn't make you feel lazy, I don't know what will. And speaking of being lazy, the other book that I read this week, which I chewed through in less than a day, as opposed to this baby, which took a whole bunch of time, was my year of rest and relaxation. So I have been looking to get my hands on this for a while. This was a really big seller not very long ago. And it's one of those things, you put it off. So I picked this up and read it, and it was absolutely delightful. It is funny. It is extremely inappropriate. Essentially, I mean, I won't spoil it, but the plot is that you're following the life of a young woman, also in New York, actually. So I guess that was my theme of the week. Following the life of a young woman who's been going through some stuff. Her parents have died. She's not having a good time. And she opts to just sleep for a year. She goes into hibernation, essentially, a drug-assisted hibernation. And so that is an excellent, excellent read. And I highly recommend getting stuck into that. It was really the vibe that I needed as I kind of slipped in and out of minutes and days and hours over my particular COVID week. So definitely recommend taking a look at that one. And actually, for a bonus book, Third book I've read recently, which I adored, was Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be, which is the new Stephen Pressfield. So if you're familiar with Stephen Pressfield, you might have seen some of his other books. The War of Art is probably his most popular one, where he talks about the resistance that's faced by people who have a creative career. But Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be is a short, lovely little read. I can see I've got post-it notes in here, but I can't remember which bits they were for. See if there's anything worth reading to you. Okay, there's one on Don't Miss Deadlines, which is actually a quote from Seth Godin's blog. It won't ship when it's perfect. It'll ship when we said it would. I mean, okay, that's pretty, I mean, duh. Okay, and then one on the importance of moving beyond the ego when you do creative work, and kind of this egoless approach to creative work, where he says it is impossible to sing or write or dance from the ego. When we sing or write or dance from the ego, we fall on our face. So anyway, neither of those were particularly good snippets, but that's what you get when you don't plan this stuff. That is an excellent read and a good short kind of kick up the ass if you need some support to commit to your creative work. All right, so I'm not really sure what's gone on in the world this week because I haven't been paying any attention because I've been in a fugue state. One thing I am aware of is the change in COVID regulations, mostly because it meant that after I tested positive, my children were still allowed to go out, which was quite frankly quite a welcome change to events after moving in and out of isolation for so many months now. So that was great. I am aware that COVID regulation has changed, that we can go to the supermarket without wearing a face mask. Love that for us. But aside from that, I don't really know what's been happening in the world. But one thing I did want to talk about today on the show is this idea of token or fake or counterfeit diversity. And it's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, particularly as I've been doing a lot more reading and a lot more work in this kind of space around class and social origin as, I guess, the next frontier or this uncharted waters in diversity and inclusion. And it's really brought to light for me when I've gone digging into that literature and started to do that work, just how non-diverse our current diversity is and what the limitations of that are. So it appears to me that we have, as a culture, and particularly as a corporate culture, embraced the concept of visibility for diversity. So if we can see different people, and by different people, we mean women and people who aren't white is essentially what we mean, because different is different from what Christina Criado Perez calls the default man, which is where the white man is the kind of default figure that we encounter in politics and the media and the workplace. And so anyone who's different, which is, the 50% of the population that isn't a man, or the majority of the population that is not white, if we can see that kind of diversity, then that kind of diversity exists. And it's a good visible sign of progress and inclusion. And I kind of challenge that. So I think visible is critical. Visible is really important. It's important that we can see a full or more diverse range of people in our environments, because you can't be what you can't see. And also because actually not only is the default man such a hardwired concept into society and into the media and into our workplaces, but it's actually led to this situation where, when it comes to the media in particular, even low-level visibility of diversity is seen as equality. So there's some really interesting research that came out of, I think, the Gina Davis Institute for Gender in the Media in America, where they were looking at what the ratio of gender representation needs to be in order for it to appear equal. And the numbers, and I think Katrine Massal or Christine Criado Perez talk about this research in one of their books, either Invisible Woman or the other book I can't remember the name of. See, COVID brain fog, I'm doing well today. But essentially, here's the numbers, if you've wondered what the numbers are. When men watch a crowd scene on a screen, when there are 17% of a crowd who are women, or visibly women, 17%, so that's 83% of the crowd of men and 17% of the crowd of women, that is perceived as a 50-50 split. I'm going to say that again. When men watch a crowd scene on a screen, on film, on camera, and they see a crowd where 17% of the crowd is women, they think that's equal. They see that, they perceive, their brain channels that as that's equal. It's a 50-50 representation. And when that number climbs to a third, so when 33% of the crowd are women, men on average perceive that crowd as having more women than men. So when 67% of the crowd are men, they perceive that they are the minority. And if that particular piece of data doesn't sum up the issue we have with visibility and perceptions of equality, I really don't know what does. Like, that is some really powerful numbers, to the point where I went and fact checked those numbers after I read them, because I was like, you've got to be joking. Is this correct? Yes, it is. And so it's one of those things where it's really hard to explain, because the people who have the power actually think they've shared it. They think that it's equal. And all around them, they can quote individual proof of all of the people who are different to them, because they notice every single one of them, because they still consider themselves to be the default. And a good example of that actually was Lizzo's speech when she won a Grammy recently. And I just adore Lizzo. Lizzo brings this particular brand of happy, excited, self-love, just unashamed pride and self-love in herself that just everybody everywhere could do with a little teaspoon of. She's just fantastic. But when she won her Grammy, she stood up and she said, look, when I was a little girl, I didn't see people like me doing this. So I thought I better do it. So here I am. I've done it. And the response on social media and the commentary has been just shit. So there's a whole lot of people, like I saw a Facebook article on it, which, let me be very clear, is such a terrible way to glean the opinions of society. Just to read the Facebook comments on any news article. It is a shortcut to despair about the state of the human race. So I will preface it with that. But, with the morbid curiosity you get when you drive past a car crash, I saw the article. I was like, yes, I love Lizzo. I'm going to read some of the comments. And the comments were just full of people who were saying, she obviously wasn't paying much attention when she was growing up. And then listing off 2 or 3 fat black women who'd had successful careers in the arts that she should have been aware of. And it just seemed that the irony was not lost on these commenters, that the fact that they could individually name just a few people across a number of decades was exactly what the problem was. But again, apparently we don't. So visibility is so important when we start to talk about what diversity really means. And I guess part of my ongoing discomfort with the term diversity is it still has this embedded kind of default in it, doesn't it? Because when we think diversity, we think like other people, not just normal ones being like middle-aged white dudes. So diversity from the norm, the norm being these middle-class middle-aged white dudes. No offense to all the middle-class middle-aged white dudes out there, but you'll see where I'm going with this. But I think that kind of prioritizing visibility has led to a situation where I think we've created, particularly in the workplace, a situation where that is now seen as enough. So if we can point to the people of colour and women in a workplace, and increasingly people with gender diversity, then we can say that our job is done. And what it does is it protects us, or it insulates us from further examination about whether or not we're actually doing things any differently, whether the people in the room who aren't middle-aged, middle-class white dudes have the same opportunities to progress and to contribute, and whether the outcome of the work we're doing is any different. And I think this is really important. And in New Zealand and in Aotearoa, one of the most common and I think concerning terminologies that gets kind of bandied around in the workplace is around using a Māori lens, using a Te Ao Māori lens on the work that we do. And I really don't see what other interpretation there is for the idea of a lens of diversity than just doing the same shit, but diversity washing it, culture washing it. It's when we tactically employ language and concepts and, put manaakitanga in our values and say mahi instead of work and then go, God, we're good, And as the collective we, being white people in New Zealand, just pat ourselves on the back and be like, so diverse, man, really good. I now know that the Māori word for coffee is kafe because there was a label above the coffee machine. And in fact, I could order that if I wanted. So diverse, such progress. But actually, that's bullshit, because if those workplaces wanted to centre a Te Ao Māori worldview as the way of making decisions and working together, then and centering values and practices that are outside the norm, that would completely change the way organisations run. It would change the way job titles worked. It would change the way organisations were structured. It would change the kind of consultation and engagement and discussion that went into making decisions. It would change where those decisions were made, how long they took, who was involved in them. And most importantly and ultimately, it would change the outcome of the work that we're doing. When we focus on changing the way people in our workplace look, rather than changing the way we collectively act or think, we are diversity washing, to the point where when it comes to a Māori worldview or a Māori lens as an example, I actually think it's dangerous. I think it has the opposite effect, because people think the job is done. The war has been fought. They've managed to tick the diversity box without losing anything, without losing any status, without losing any power, and without changing the way things are done. And the reason that this is so important is because it's just so far beyond inclusion. Inclusion says, can I play at the table with everybody else and not feel left out with the people who still get to keep all the power? I don't want to play at the table. I don't even want the table. Let's change the table. Let's eat outside. Right? We've got different things to do. And I always think about a conversation I had with the chairman of a local sports trust in New Zealand some years ago. And he was a local lawyer. So, as is often the case with the governance of community groups in small communities, he was, a local success story. He was a local guy. He had been a really successful lawyer. He owned his own practice. He had a fancy car. Really nice guy. Really dedicated to his community and really wanted to do great work and make a difference and get their community more active, get kids playing more sport. These things are very, very rarely from a place of malice. They're simply not how it works. We're not talking about bad people here, just to be very, very clear. We are not talking about bad people. We're talking about bad systems, okay? And so I'd kind of challenged him in a workshop that we'd had. And I said, look, the people you're talking about serving here, the vulnerable communities that you want to mobilise, the people that you most want to reach, who are most at risk by not having physically active lifestyles, they're not in this room. They're not around this table, and their voices aren't there anywhere, right? So we're using data or assumptions to try and work out how best to serve our least active communities, who are also our most impoverished. But they're not here. Don't you think it's a bit off that there are decisions being made that affect people and they've got no way of contributing? And he didn't disagree with me. He was nodding along. He was like, yeah, but I mean, what do I do? He's like, we're always sending invitations to different members of the community or to different groups to come along to our meetings. And, they don't come to the table. How do we get them around the table? I said, well, of course they don't want to come to the table. Fuck coming to this table, right? This table sucks. I wouldn't want to sit at this table. I'm only at this table because you're paying me. This table is terrifying, right? This table is so terrifying if you are not literate in the bullshit and bureaucracy that goes into, board governance and just policies and reports and processes. And like, if you're not literate in that stuff is terrifying. I'm like, you need to get away from your own table, mate. And he's like, so he looked at me and he said quite sincerely, he said, Alicia, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to go and step over the burnt out car carcasses and go knock on the doors and insert poor neighborhood in his community here? And I said, well, yeah, maybe. I think you have to go to their place. And I think about that story all the time because I think that really sums up what a lot of the issues are with the way that we're trying to do diversity and inclusion at the moment, because, excuse the COVID cough, we want people to come to our place and play by our rules and ultimately deliver the same result and protect our power and make us feel, not just that, not just do we want our power protected, our norms preserved, our table kept at the centre, but we also want to be made to feel good about it now. Like, we pat ourselves on the back. Wow, so diverse. And so I've been reading a lot recently about class and social origin as a diversity frontier. And let me be very clear that particular layer of disadvantage or as a social characteristic is so intersectional, right? So it intersects really powerfully with gender and with race. So it kind of is just one of those fun layers that makes everything worse. So like, you're a woman and you want to have a good life, think that's bad enough? Haha, try being a poor woman, right? Like, it's not good times. But the systematic disadvantage that is a result of our social origin or our class is really powerful because we don't talk about it and because you can't see it, not really, right? So you can see the difference between a woman and a man, generally speaking. Obviously, not for a second throwing any stones at my NB friends, at my non-binary friends out there. You do you. But it is a really visible form of diversity, as is often, but not always, which is also a cause for a lot of concern, race. But class is largely invisible, and so it just sits in the room. And what it means is that if we were looking to do some diversity washing as a workplace, we could get away with hiring women and people of colour who just happen to go to the same universities, have the same degrees, think in the same way, and consider our job to be done. And that is extremely dangerous because there's no guarantee that you're going to get a difference in outcome or a difference in the way things are done as a result. That's a form of protecting power and diversity washing it. The thing about class is that it's such a powerful disadvantage in the workplace. So some studies that came out of the US, one in particular that I think is worth referencing, is that if you are from lower social origin or lower social class, then you are 32% less likely to be promoted into a manager position, which, to be clear, as a statistic, is actually more of a penalty than if you were a woman or if you're a person of colour. So if you're a woman, you're 27% less likely to be promoted into a managerial position. If you're a person of colour, you are 25% less likely. But if you come from a lower social class, you are 32% less likely to be promoted into a managerial position. And so obviously that's American data, but when you look at how that spans across other developed countries like the UK, it stands up pretty neatly. And one of the reasons that really sucks, aside from the fact that we are obviously going on to embed and perpetrate more generations of this stuff, is that it's actually allowed. We actually design for class privilege. So while we can no longer write in our recruitment policies or in our value statements that we only want, white dudes, we can write a set of professional values that really privilege a particular origin and a particular way of relating with the world. And we could design workplaces that have norms and conventions that are very exclusionary to people that don't come from inside that world. And so I wrote a long article recently about the problem with professionalism, which is kind of that it is a sanctioned form of discrimination that assumes a bunch of literacy and knowledge about how we show up at work and really privileges a middle class background. And so if you come from a working class or lower class background and you don't have those particular frameworks of knowledge or networks, you're not literate with just corporate bullshit, and you say things like corporate bullshit, then you're significantly less likely to get ahead in that world. But not only that, it's completely sanctioned. People say, yes, very unprofessional. Very unprofessional. And so they dress this kind of class discrimination up as professionalism, which again, not bad people, bad systems. Just making that point again for the morning. And so what upsets me the most about that, aside from the fact that, once again, it's a form of discrimination against something people have absolutely no control over and has absolutely no relationship to the quality of contribution around intelligence and curiosity and understanding and ability to work and to do cool stuff, is that most of the data that has been done about this, and to be clear, a lot of the research is pretty emerging, or it's a bit kind of pickpockety, but there is a really great study that came initially out of the US military, but was then extended across other workplaces, where they discovered that managers or leaders who were from lower social class are actually better leaders on average because they are less self-centered, right? So they're more attention out in the way that they lead. They're more motivated, they're more capable, and here's the kicker, design more equitable workplaces because they're more likely to give people who aren't from the professional standard norm a go and to support them in their development. So actually, not only are we systematically discriminating them out, but they're actually better leaders. And so if that doesn't tell you that it's not about merit or character or professionalism or work ethic, I really don't know what does. And when we sit in a room where everybody is just kind of going through the motions and following the same goddamn process, it is really worth thinking about what it would mean if we took this conversation somewhere else. And if we're in a situation where we felt uncomfortable. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things about diversity washing or fake diversity, is that it is the performance of diversity in a way that still keeps us comfortable, us being people who are in a position of power or who are privileged by the color of our skin or conforming to a social norm or standard in some way, of which I count myself obviously in that group. Like, I'm a young, blonde, white female with a public platform. I'm doing just fine, mate. Except the fact that I'm a woman. And so when we try to create inclusion in a way that makes sure nobody else loses anything, because that's the only politically acceptable way to do it, it's the only way to get it across the line, then we are really shutting ourselves off to the possibilities and potential and opportunities that come from completely throwing the rule book out and thinking in a completely different way, not just about how we will do something that's already been predetermined or preordained, but whether we should do that thing in the first place and how we would come to the conclusion that we would want to do that thing. It is about reassessing priorities. It is about centering a different set of values. And all of those things mean stepping outside a very limited comfort zone of how things are done at work and challenging really deeply embedded assumptions about what it means to be effective or to be professional or to be anything else. And honestly, our track record isn't great. So I feel like there's some real scope for us to experiment here. Like, if you look at the success rates on projects and how often different initiatives in the workplace are actually delivered on time and to budget and realize the benefits that they were intended to realize, you'll see that there's quite a lot of scope for improvement. Like, there's not a lot to be lost here, but what there is to be lost is status and comfort and safety and reassurance that your status and power will remain intact. You've just kind of like let someone sit on the bench with you down there, as long as they don't chew too loudly. And I just think that's really shit, because if you think about the quality of thinking and ideas and possibility that we're shutting ourselves off to by having such normative, limited workplaces. And you know that it's true because you know that every time you change jobs, it's just a different version of the same shit everywhere you go. We're really doing the world a disservice. So I think that sucks. And that sums up my rant for today on token diversity. So if you have followed along and you did enjoy that rant, then do please make sure to comment or to share it with your friends. If anything else, if nothing else, rather, I hope that it has been something that's a little bit thought-provoking for your Friday morning. So with that, I'm going to go lie down. This is the most talking, thinking, and working I have managed to do this week. And I will be back with you next Friday. Hopefully I will be significantly healthier. Thank you so much for coming along today, everybody. Have a great Friday and enjoy your weekend. Ka kite.